training topic on Canvas discussion boards. All of the trainings this week are going to be recorded, so you have the option of viewing this one again or any others that you might have missed. And due to the large number of participants and not trying to distract our presenter, we're muting your microphones, and we ask that you use the chat box located at the bottom of your screen to send us your questions, and we'll kind of be monitoring those throughout the presentation and trying to stop and answer those as we can. I also want to share some other information. If you are brand new to remote or online teaching, we recommend that you visit and explore the resources on the K-State Keep Teaching website at ksu.edu/keepteaching. The Preparing and Planning page under the Remote Teaching and Learning Resources tab has a checklist of steps to get you started. The homepage of the website also includes getting started checklist and for students and faculty. And I will provide that link in the chat box. Just a second here. So it's kind of a list of links, and I will talk some more about those as well. And then we'll get started. So any additional questions you have today, please send them to gcid@k-state.edu. This email address is being monitored by the Global Campus Instructional Design team, and all inquiries will be responded to as quickly as possible. You can also contact the IT help desk by email at helpdesk@ksu.edu. Their phone number is 785-532-7722. And then, of course, continue to check the K-State Keep Teaching training sessions page to see if there are any other sessions that can help provide you information as you transition to remote teaching. And that link is in the chat box now as well. And I'll share these again at the end of this session. Also, please remember, if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat feature. Thank you, and we'll go ahead and let Laura get started.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you are ready to dive into discussions, right? We're all ready. Oh, wow. This has been really big, huh? And so we're trying to just help give you a few tools to get ready to move your content to be able to teach remotely. We aren't expecting perfection in any way, shape, or form. It can take a long time to kind of think these through. So I'm going to talk through some effective online discussion techniques. There are some pieces to doing discussions online that are really important that we think through before we get started, but it's also important just to keep in mind that we just need to work with our students through all of this as we're learning and exploring this newer way of teaching, that we can change things as we go, adapt things as we learn, and just get better at it. So my first focus is going to be to help you kind of set expectations with your students. We're going to review a few best practices, talk about planning and facilitating those discussions, and I'll go over Canvas and how that discussion board tool works, and some ideas about creating engaging and interesting topics, and then share a few strategies and tools that you could consider using. So discussions are one of the main ways that we build community in an online platform. It's a way to connect with students in an asynchronous way where they all can respond and give input and thoughts, and you can really see what it is they're learning and kind of redirect or readdress any issues that you feel like the class as a whole isn't able to understand. One of the nice things about doing it in an online format is that you will hear from every single student if they're in the class and participating and able to participate, of course. You can make it a requirement that everyone posts to the community. And so some of those students that may sit in the back of your room or not feel comfortable speaking up during lecture, you'll be able to hear from them too. So that's one of the things that really helps to build community in an online discussion. But it's important that we set expectations about how students should behave, if you will, in an online discussion. We live in a world with social media where a lot of reactions are not necessarily appropriate for an academic setting as well. The short texting communication that we often see isn't really appropriate in an academic setting. So you'll find on the K-State Global Campus website, if you Google netiquette, N-E-T, basically network etiquette, you can put a statement or kind of create your own statement of what your expectations of communication are in an online discussion or an online course. Make sure that students are thinking about how they're communicating with each other and keeping it professional and academic. So we want to set you up for success as you move into this direction. And so one of the most important things is to think through the requirements for your discussions. Some faculty, some instructors feel that you just want to have it there and available for students to connect and communicate. And it's sort of your check in with them, and that's fine. But it can be a very important academic tool to show students learning as well. So, in those kinds of cases, you want to think through how many posts students are required, how many words in some cases they're required to post. Um, in many cases, faculty and instructors will require students to have one original post and 2 responses to fellow students. That's something we see quite a lot, but that's not a requirement of every discussion. You have to figure out what's going to work best for you, for your students, and this new learning environment. Consider modeling what your expectations are. Give them a sample of what you'd like to see as a first response and a sample of what you'd like to see in response to other students. And even consider doing a rubric to help them understand how they can earn the points for a discussion. So I've put here several links to some Canvas guides that can help with discussion posts and using media within discussions. So I'm going to actually jump out to Canvas right now, and we're going to talk through using the Canvas discussion board platform. Okay, so Janelle will go ahead and get those links posted, and you can copy those and open those up later. So this is our K-State Online Essentials, where our faculty learn more about teaching online, and this is our discussion board. You can see a series of different discussions. The first one here is something that I would recommend you all consider doing in having some sort of question discussion board where you and the other students can check in and ask questions and answer questions about what's going on in class. So it could be, I don't see this assignment, I don't understand this assignment, when is this due, I don't understand this chapter, I can't solve this problem, all of those kinds of things, so that students can all see the questions that they're having and also see the answers. It's a place where you can answer multiple questions you might get in an email in one location and make sure all students see the response. So this is something I highly suggest that every faculty member set up, and make sure that you are monitoring it carefully so that you can respond. Encourage your students to respond to fellow students here too. If they know the answer, have them answer it. You could even consider giving a few extra credit points or something like that towards those that are really responding and helping out in that space. This doesn't have to be worth points. It's just a way to help your students have a place to connect and get questions answered. You could have students that feel uncomfortable asking questions publicly, so they might send you an email. You can take that question and then you can go ahead and post to this questions discussion board too, just saying, I received this question, keep it anonymous, but I wanted everybody to see the answer. So it's a great way to communicate with your students. Beyond that, normally in a class you're just starting online, you might do introductions, but that's not really necessary in these situations. You could consider doing sort of a community board as well. Sorry if you heard my puppy dog. We're going to be hearing that a lot, huh? um, that those can be just places where people can connect. Maybe they want to try and study together in a Zoom space, or they're just feeling really overwhelmed and they need to talk to someone. That can also be a part of sort of an open discussion that's available, not really date required. But discussions can also be an academic tool. So I want to talk you through how that works. Oh, first, we had a question last time I want to walk everybody through. They're wondering how to pin a discussion. Right over here, the 3 dots on the right-hand side, if you select that, you will be able to select pin or unpin in this case, and that will pin it to the top of the discussions page. All right, so let's talk about discussions. This is a graded discussion that was created in our Online Essentials class. You can see that there's a lot of material here for the students to answer, several different questions, several different links to materials that they need to read before they respond to that question. I'm going to talk you through the settings that we did for that discussion board. So you have your instructions here, and then you have here the options for how to set up your board. Clicking on Allow Threaded Replies means that a conversation will keep connected throughout the discussion board. So if the first student answers the question, then anyone who responds to that student directly will appear right under that first post. Then another student does their first post, and the responses to that person fall underneath there as well. So that kind of helps organize the discussion board. Another setting is users must post before seeing replies. We often recommend this in an academic setting because you want students to formulate their own thoughts before they post their original post, their first post. This makes it so that they can't see what the other students have posted, read through everything they say, and then regurgitate the exact same thing. They need to think it through first, post their first post, and then they can respond to others. They'd be able to see the whole board. I wouldn't recommend you do that on that community board or that questions board, but certainly on an academic post, this would be a good idea. Now, graded is something that's very important. If you do not have graded checked, then it will not appear in your assignments and your grade book. This is the key to getting it to show up as an assignment. So you do not need to create a separate assignment for each discussion. You just need to click your discussion as graded, okay? So that will then trigger all of this here to appear, where you can give points, you can decide if it's just complete, incomplete, percentages, that kind of thing. Usually we do points, but that can change. If you have a group of assignments that your grade book and your assignments are organized by, you can assign that there. And then if you are doing small groups, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, And peer-required reviews are also an option. And then in the assign to, which we'll talk more about in assignments if you go to that session, you would want to set the due date. And you can set an available from if you don't want students posting too early. You want to make sure that they're staying within a weekly format. That's fine. But setting the due date means that marks any student that completes the assignment but doesn't stop them from responding after that due date. If you fill in the until date, students will no longer be able to post to the discussion after that date, which may be what you want them to do, but it also cuts off that conversation. So I prefer doing just a due date on a discussion board. You will see if someone posts late when you're in the gradebook, but you can also allow students to complete the conversation, if you will. Now, one point that we sometimes suggest, and one thing you need to consider, is whether or not you want to have sort of 2 due dates for each discussion board. We know our students, they tend to procrastinate, right? It's very often that they will wait until the last day to actually post. And that makes a discussion a little bit challenging because you have your students that respond right away, and then they're waiting for someone else to respond to. So one thing that we recommend is that you set a midweek date that isn't necessarily the due date here, but you make an expectation that students will post their first post by Wednesday, Thursday, whatever works best for you. And then their responses to others are due by the end of the week. All right, I've covered a whole bunch on that right now. I'm going to check in with Janelle and see if anybody has questions on this.
Nothing on this, Laura, but we may touch base when you talk about using Canvas groups and discussion boards. We might have some questions about that.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so this is the essence of creating a discussion board. I want to show you a couple other things as I hop out of the edit platform. Give me a second. Discussion boards can have rubrics as well. They're a little bit different than when it's in an assignment where the rubric appears at the bottom. They're actually over on this 3-dot set on the discussion board. So you click on that and then you click Show Rubric. And so I'm going to leave this up there. Several people in the last session wanted to screenshot it as an idea of a rubric to use, and you're welcome to recreate this if you'd like to. It's a very simple rubric. It's just points for whether or not they've addressed the original question that you asked, whether or not they replied to other folks substantively, and then if they replied on time. Something to consider. If the time factor isn't as important to you, change the points. If 10 points isn't appropriate for your grading capacity, you've set your course up for 1,000 points, change the points. That is not the important piece, but just letting students know that those responding to the question clearly is important, and then responding to their peers is important, is something to consider. All right, the other thing I wanted to show you is what it looks like in SpeedGrader. So give me a second here. If you have a graded discussion, it will open up in SpeedGrader. And then you will see the student's original post, and then also any responses they made to fellow students. It collects it all in one location, so you're not trying to hunt and peck to find those pieces of the discussion. It makes it much easier to grade if you're choosing to grade in this way. So you can see the original post that's a little bit more lengthy And then these responses are just quick, couple of sentences, but acknowledging the communication that they're having with fellow students. All right, any questions on the rubric or on using SpeedGrader for discussions? All right, I'll go ahead and move on. So we had some, oh, go ahead.
Hold on a minute, Laura. We just had a question come in. Does each discussion create a separate assignment?
So yes, each discussion board has a separate assignment. So each of these here are separate assignments in my assignments list. So now I'm going to go to assignments. And you'll see, again, I've made an assignment group that has all of the discussions themselves. Okay, my assignments I put in a separate group here. You could have them all in one, but also if you're weighting the different content differently, you could create groups. I won't go into that right now. Go to the assignments training. They'll do much better at explaining all of that. But yes, each discussion you create would become a separate assignment in your grade book, in your set of assignments. Great question. Okay, so let's talk about groups a little bit in discussions. Groups can be very helpful if you have a larger size class. If you think about discussions in your classroom, you have 40 students, you don't have time for all 40 students to respond, right? If you are in an online classroom and you think about 40 students, one original post per student with 2 responses, that's 40 times 3. That's 120 posts for each student to read if they're reading everything. That's a lot. That could become very overwhelming. So doing small groups can help break that apart so that you kind of make the classroom feel a little bit smaller and those discussions to be a little bit more manageable. I would encourage you to consider between 5 and 10 students per discussion group. Any less, and you have the potential to not have enough communication in that small group. Any more, and it still becomes unwieldy. So think about your course, what's going to make sense. You would still create just one discussion group, or excuse me, one discussion assignment. But then when you are editing it, you would assign it as a group discussion and then assign it to the individual groups. And so when a student comes to that, it would then break them up. And let me see, I believe I have one set up in that way. So I can show you, I'm trying to remember which one. It's got to be this one here. Okay, so see how when I was in the list of discussions, I have 53 posts here, 57 posts here. Those are the larger classes. Okay, that's the larger group. But then you don't see individual posts here because it's broken it down into the small groups. So when I click on this, now I'm going to have these individual groups where there were only 12 posts and 14 posts and 11 posts, kind of breaking it down so that the students aren't as overwhelmed. I'm going to jump in. I don't want to dive too far into groups, but I want to show you that each of those students would then click into their group. It looks exactly the same to them. They only see that that discussion post, but it's a smaller group of students having that conversation. And they are now in the group functionality, which has fewer choices over here. To get back out of groups can be a little tricky. You kind of have to click back out through the navigation here to get back to modules. That smaller group setting really can help your students manage things, but it does mean that not everyone in the class sees all of the responses for the entire class, right? So one thing we recommend is that the instructors kind of summarize everything once the discussion is finished. You certainly can be a part of the discussion along with the students, give them a few redirections and ideas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But at the end, summarize what all of the groups talked about. Give them a chance to see the ideas of other people. So maybe you say, John in group 1 had a really great point about whatever the reading was. Sue in group 2 said this about this author, and I really wanted everyone to hear that. So then they know you're reading everything, and they know the ideas that their fellow students in other groups are sharing. So that can kind of help mold the discussion. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if we have questions.
Laura, can you just review real quick how to set up groups or a discussion?
Okay,
So
I
there's
don't want to
that one.
spend too much time on this because it's pulling away from discussions, but under people, all right, you would then create a group set, and that would then, you call it discussion groups, call it week 5, whatever you want to do. You would then create your groups here. You can do it in a lot of different ways. You can have it you can give it different group names. You can limit the number of participants. You can technically let students sign up for their groups. You can have the system automatically assign students. There's a lot of different ways that it works. So I'd just dive in. I'd also look at the Canvas guides on using groups, and then consider coming to some of the drop-in sessions on Thursday and Friday if you have further questions on that.
One other thing, Laura, can groups look at another group's discussion or ask questions of another group? Okay.
No. Once you've got small groups, it is not possible for others to see that group's information. It kind of locks it down into that small group. So if it's very important to you that everyone have access to everything, you would not necessarily want to do groups. There are ways that you could manipulate it, so you could make it visible, but in that larger group, but not set the expectation that everybody respond. We could talk you through that, but that's a lot higher level. I don't want to get into that and scare people into sort of a complicated way to manage it. But in the group settings, only the 5 students here can see their discussion. Only the 5 students here can see that discussion. All right.
And then real quick, before we get on to the next thing, what's your suggestion of, would an instructor want to do some sort of summary post, even if it is a whole class discussion?
I think that's a great idea too, especially if it was a big group, but you kept it in a one discussion board, because the reality is a lot of our students will post their original post 2 responses, and stop. They won't read every post. It's just a reality. And so if you find something really valuable that someone shares, it could be that a student doesn't see it. So doing that summary, kind of wrapping everything up, shows both your presence, your involvement in the discussion. Even if you decide not to post within the discussion, it shows that you've read through everything. It gives you an opportunity to give kudos to a few students, and make sure you're not giving kudos to the same students each time, but kind of highlights their contributions to class. And it does kind of summarize and make sure that the most important points you wanted students to get from that discussion are shared with everybody. So great question, and definitely consider doing that summary post regardless of whether it's small groups or not. Okay. So there are lots of different discussion types. We've kind of talked through several of these. Some are informal, social areas, student lounge. I've got questions. You can even consider making discussion groups for study, setting up study groups or doing reviews. Be aware that you can set it up so that students can start discussions. I don't usually suggest this. Make sure you're monitoring it closely, but it is a tool that students can use as well, and they will sometimes jump in there and start a discussion and get the ball rolling on. I do not understand the homework assignment for this week. Someone please help me kind of thing. And you could go and piggyback off of that and start responding. All right, so anytime we're doing a discussion, we need to make sure that we're asking a good question, right? So we need to make sure that we're definitely asking open-ended questions, that we're trying to trigger students to really reflect on what they're learning and summarize what they're learning and apply what they're learning. This is our opportunity to kind of hit the top of that Bloom's taxonomy area. So just asking them to summarize the chapter may not be the best direction to go because you have 20 students, you're going to get 20 of pretty much the same answer because the chapter only means a certain amount, right? But you could instead ask, what was the most important element that you read this week? What really resonated with you? What did you struggle with from the reading this week? How would you apply what we learned today to if you're in a particular industry? Find me an article that relates to what we learned this week. There are a lot of different things that you can do to push students beyond just, do you have any questions? Yes or no, or that sort of quick answer that is kind of the same for every student. So we definitely want to think through whether or not we've asked a good question. It still is okay for you to do synchronous live discussions. I know we're really trying to encourage everyone to be asynchronous because we know students' schedules, your schedules, everything's kind of up in the air right now. So expecting a student to show up at 10 a.m. on Tuesday and Thursday may not be realistic for their lives right now and the environment that we're working in. But offering those live discussions is still an option that you have. You can do a Zoom session just like we're doing here. I would recommend that you record it like we're doing these recordings and understand if a student can't make it. Could be a really good option though for reviewing for an exam or giving real detailed information on a paper you want them to do. And you'll find that a lot of students really do appreciate that live connection still. So we're not saying you can't. Just make sure that you're providing the majority of your material in an asynchronous structure and really consider recording it, making it available, and being flexible with students. We want to encourage students to be creative in their responses. And so this could be that you have them do something other than typing into the discussion. Maybe you have them record just a minute-long video or, kind of responding to the question that you've posed. Maybe you start with a video and ask them to post a video. Maybe they create a PowerPoint slide or a image of some kind. There was an art teacher this summer who used discussions. He had students take a picture of the art they were creating and post it in the discussion board as an image, and then students gave feedback on those responses, sort of a peer review of the images, and learned from each other in that discussion board. It doesn't just have to be write out your answer. So think about what are the options you could give to students to respond? How could you make it more creative, more engaging, more fun to respond rather than just typing out your responses? How are we doing on questions?
No other questions at this time.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about following up during the discussion, giving that summary at the end. It's important that you be present in the discussions, but it's a delicate balance between um, being too involved and not being involved enough. Students need to feel your presence there. They need to know that you're engaged and they're not just there by themselves, but it also can kind of stunt the communication if our instructors, our faculty are jumping in and responding every time. So kind of watch the flow of the discussion and think about how you can jump in and help them take it to the next level. Think about secondary questions that you might be able to post to help them think things through. Or if you notice that the discussion's kind of dying, what could you do to add to the discussion? How could you direct the discussion in another direction? So you may even, when you're formulating your original question, think about secondary questions that you could take and add into the discussion somewhere in the middle of the week. Here are a few tools to consider. We are not at all pushing people to use outside tools at this time. Please get comfortable with the Canvas discussion board. But we do want to make sure that you know there are other formats out there for you to consider. Most of these have a free layout, an option within them, and some of you may be using Top Hat, and that can be used online as well. But don't worry too much about that. Flipgrid in particular is used quite extensively, and it is sort of a video platform where students have to respond by video, and it's just 1 or 2 minutes, and so it does work well. So I just wanted you to be aware of those tools. And then I'm going to unplug here. I'm going to show a short YouTube video that I think demonstrates some of the things that we have stereotypes about online discussion boards and some of the bad practices that I hope you'll be able to avoid.
It is a little quiet, so at the beginning.
Pie. Right after I finish writing words, I'm gonna eat pie. I need pie.
I would have migrated to colonial America because I always seek freedom from oppression.
I wouldn't have migrated because the abandonment of family would have forbidden me from such an act.
I agree.
I agree.
Thanks.
I believe I need more information before I can reasonably respond, huh? Where am I from? What social demographic do I come from, huh?
5 minutes left, it's time. This is my chance to shine.
I believe the color yellow is used to represent cowardice.
I thought that the color lemon was used to represent a lack of bravery.
I believe that's what I just said, Carrie.
Wow, great insight. I would have never thought of this.
I agree.
It reminds me of a time in my life when I was in a similar situation as King Richard.
This class is so fun. Really lovely. Just great comments. Great.
You guys are so awesome. I learned so much.
Good. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else in the whole wide world.
I agree.
Smiley face.
LOL.
That was awesome. A's for everyone.
Great comments.
Sorry I'm late. I had a thing. But for obvious reasons previously stated, I want to migrate it.
I agree.
Okay, that's kind of silly. Hopefully you'll have more success than that in your online discussions. We certainly hope. But I can go ahead and answer some questions if we have some additional ones, and how we can effectively make discussions available to students.
One other question so far, Laura, are there any disadvantages to allowing students to like somebody else's comment or discussion piece?
I don't think so. I don't think it's a really highly used function within Canvas, that discussion board. It's not quite as usable, user-friendly, visible the way it is in Facebook or some of the social media tools. So I don't think it hurts any, and can sort of, help promote some of those comments that that students find helpful or informative. So something to consider. I don't think it really helps or hurts either way.
We're getting a few more in here. What about dealing with sensitive topics? For example, the film just skirted the issue of genocide of Native peoples.
Yeah, so it's going to be really important that for sensitive topics, you are setting the boundaries, setting the guidelines for what your expectations are for the students. You're going to have to monitor it closely to kind of make sure that you address anything that comes through that you feel isn't handling the topic carefully. Maybe reach out to that student directly and ask them to change their response, or ask them to consider how they're handling it. You have the power to delete posts as an instructor, so if something comes through that is completely inappropriate, you could screenshot it, you could delete it, and then you could go talk to the student and ask them to repost. Just something to consider. I'm seeing that someone is asking to show the rubric again, so let me jump in here and share my screen and show that rubric again. Give me a second. But I can keep answering questions while I do that.
Okay. Yeah, there's one other question about using a discussion board to elicit students' questions about their understanding of an asynchronous lecture. Any suggestions for that?
So one of the things we talked about in the last session was to use pages and kind of post your discussion, your lecture video right there, then post a link to the discussion board right underneath it, or within a module, you could post your lecture and then have that sort of Q&A discussion board right underneath it, label it similarly. So we've got lecture 5, questions about lecture 5, lecture 6, question about lecture 6. Those will sometimes elicit conversation, but most of the time, unless they're given more guidance than just what questions do you have, it kind of doesn't work as well. So that's why we encourage more that reflection piece. Tell us what was the most challenging part of the discussion, or what you read. Tell us, what was the most important piece that you pulled from it, so that they're required to post, because if they don't have a question, they're not going to post. Does that make sense? I'm sorry. This doesn't seem to be showing the full rubric. I want to show it all, so give me a second here. I don't think I've got the right rubric. Any other questions?
No other questions right now.
Okay. There's the rubric. That's the one that I was showing earlier. So you're welcome to screenshot it and copy it and use it to your heart's content. You can also do a search for rubrics, and there are quite a few out there in the Creative Commons area that you could use and consider adapting for your purposes. Just make sure it makes sense for you. Is it really necessary or appropriate for students to use APA citations in a discussion? You wouldn't necessarily expect them to do that in the middle of a conversation in your lecture, but they do need to attribute, where they found what they're talking about, right? They should use quotations. They should say it's from the book, those kinds of things. But then if you're in a graduate level course, maybe that citation piece is very important. You're in a research course, they need to show that properly. Then you would want to consider that as potentially a part of the point value of your discussion. Anything else?
Okay, kind of a follow-up to that, adding a rubric to a discussion. So you would recommend making every discussion graded versus holistically assessing students' discussion throughout the semester?
I think that if it is not graded in some way, you will have inconsistency in responses. So it, again, is going to depend on the population of your students. If you have had to this point a course that is completely discussion based, you've established your expectations that everybody needs to be a part of a discussion, they need to contribute, those kinds of things, and you explain clearly that you are going to be tracking their participation across all the discussion boards, and that is going to be their entire grade versus, of 100 points over 10 discussion boards or something like that. Then you can make that happen. Part of the challenge of that, though, would be how do you track all of the different contributions that student makes? It's more challenging to find all of their contributions in a non-graded discussion because it's not going to trigger the speed grader unless it's a graded discussion. So finding all of the responses for each student could be a little bit more challenging in that layout. Not saying it can't be done, it's just a little more challenging.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. I'm going to post the links once again to some important areas that will help you out with remote teaching and learning. Thank you once again for attending the session today. We hope that you found it helpful. If you do have any further questions, I did post that email for our instructional design team. That is gcid@k-state.edu. And they are monitoring that so they can respond as quickly as possible. You can also contact the IT help desk at 785-532-7722 or via email at helpdesk@ksu.edu. Please continue to keep checking the K-State Keep Teaching training sessions to see if there are others that will provide you useful information as you transition to remote teaching. We are adding sessions to that website almost daily, so that link is also in the chat box as well. Thank you everybody once again for attending.